First college football playoff rankings put out last night, 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN.
Yep.
Reese, Boog, Greg, Joey Galloway, phenomenal show.
Crushed.
It was great to watch. What are the big takeaways from this, Tone? And what do we need to be talking about college ball-wise on this glorious Wednesday, pal?
Yeah, there are a few takeaways, and let's start with the teams that feel, let's say, disrespected. And we'll start right here in the state that we live in, Indiana. Ranked 8th. The closest win that they've had this year is by 14 points. They've been absolutely blowing teams out. Now, their strength of schedule isn't what the rest of the teams in the college football playoff currently are, but you can only play your schedule, and they've been absolutely dominant throughout. And there's teams ahead of them who have not been dominant throughout, just like Indiana has. And there's a lot of like, hey, if Indiana had a different name next to their resume, they would 100% be higher in that situation. Like I personally would have put them at 5 or 6.
Hell yeah.
With BYU, like Miami at 4, they're undefeated and they have a better resume than Indiana. So I wouldn't put IU ahead of Miami. But like Miami, BYU, Indiana at 4, 5, 6, I think would have been a situation because BYU has 2 top 25 wins. Tennessee, Penn State, Texas, Ohio State, they all have 1 top 25 win. So are we going resume or are we going eye test? Like that, I think that was the big takeaway from last night.
Yeah, big takeaway last night of the rankings. And Ward Manuel, who's the athletic director from Michigan, who's currently serving as the chair of the board of the College Football Playoff Committee, not to be confused with Lieutenant General, who is running the College Football Playoff Committee. That is a position that kind of rotates. And the people that are in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is 3-year stints, I believe. They rotate them. So last night, Reese Davis talked about, amongst other things, the IU, the BYU, the rankings. Vandy also a part of the AP vote, top 25, but not a part of the College Football Playoff top 25. So there's a lot of conversations. And Reese Davis was talking to Ward Manuel, who's going to be serving as the mouthpiece, I think, all year on that College Football Playoff Reveal show. And he said that, like, hey, the football eye test matters. And they said, obviously, Indiana has the 103rd ranked strength of schedule. I mean, it's the only one that's triple digits in the top 10 by a wide margin. I mean, it is like 57. Somebody has a 57 strength of schedule up there, and then the 103 looks like alarming.
God.
But I think also people understand, there it is. There's a 75th, 59th there, and then 103rd. I mean, it looks worse than everybody else.
Yeah.
But Ward Manuel, for some people that are disrespected by where Indiana's ranked, I am not actually. Like, I am not disrespected by Indiana being ranked. I think a lot of Indiana people were pumped they're top 10. Okay, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And also, Indiana needs to know, and same with BYU, where you are right now with where this college football playoff is. If you win,
agreed,
you're in this thing. Even if they got Ohio State in 2 weeks or whatever. They got Michigan this week where Indiana is 14-point favorites, which I don't think it's ever happened before in history. And then they got Ohio State or whatever. If they lose to Ohio State, and if Ohio State remains up where they are, it's like Indiana's in. And I think that's the big conversation as opposed to should they be 6, should they be 5, should they be 7? It's like right now they're in there. Got to get a win over Michigan, obviously, as you go forward. BYU has the Utah game, obviously, which is a massive ordeal. That's going to potentially give them a strength of schedule boost because of the game. But what Ward Manuel said is a lot of football eye tests this year. And that's strictly because of the combo that's been happening. How many losses is an SEC team allowed to have versus like a Big 12 team? Are we going to put 2 Big 12 teams in because we're going to leave out one SEC team that has 2 losses or 3 losses? Or are we going to do something with the Big 10? And obviously this first one doesn't matter. It's the last one that matters, but this one kind of paves the path for what they're looking at. Ward Manuel said football eye test or like football ability or watching the games is a big piece of it. So Indiana being dominant, by the way, he talked is like, we watch the games, we think Indiana's really good. They weren't talking as if Indiana was screwed at all. They were like 103rd strength of schedule, but watching them play football, they look really good.
Unreal.
So it wasn't like the take that drop it. So congrats to IU.
I agree. I agree with you 100%, Pat. And I think there is some math, and the math was mathing a little bit last night. Let's say Notre Dame wins out. Okay, if Notre Dame wins out based off of last night's rankings, they are in. Okay, so Notre Dame is 1. Boise is probably going to be the other. That's 2. Big 12. Based off of last night's rankings, I think the Big 12 is only going to get one. It's going to be the champion because you see BYU there, and then the next ranked is much farther down. I think the Big 12 is going to get one, so that's 3. ACC, based on where SMU is ranked. SMU ranked number 13, being the first one out. I think that said a lot last night, so I think ACC, based on Miami or SMU, I think they're only going to get one.
Clemson losing to Louisville is a big deal. And I know that people don't want to hear this, and people weren't, they were kind of bringing it up about Indiana last night. And I heard Greg McElroy, and we got mad respect for Greg.
Love Greg.
GMAC,
Yeah, GMAC loves college ball. He hammers beer.
Yeah, he
Love
gets
IPAs.
after it.
I mean, he hammers beers. I don't think I've ever seen...
Like chestnut.
I guess it was an incredible feat. Like, I am
Oh, yeah.
impressive force.
Yeah, deleting beers.
Yeah, see you later.
Can't just spin it.
Came up to me one time and said, "Hey, how you doing? Are you drinking a beer or not?" And it's like, Greg McElroy, I'm drinking a beer with Greg McElroy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we had a night, and it's like, Greg is a dog. And I respect his brain. But he went on a big pitch about how just because their brand isn't one that's supposed to be up there, it feels like they're getting punished. And I think everybody in Indiana respects and appreciates somebody like Greg McElroy going to bat for him.
Yeah.
But it definitely matters. Your preseason ranking definitely matters. Going into the season, being Indiana, as opposed to Indiana hasn't been, known in the football world for, 50? They won the Holiday Bowl in 1979.
That's right.
Never.
Huge win.
1979, huge win. They won that thing. And Penix had to run during the COVID there, but nobody really paid attention because everybody left immediately afterwards. So it's like what you were ranked going into the season, especially in this first ranking, definitely matters. Definitely surprised. That's why for the ACC, if Clemson would have been able to continue to go preseason, they were supposed to. They lose to Georgia, then they figure it out. They lose to Louisville. Now the entire ACC is kind of like being judged about that, I think, Tone. I think that is clearly how the CFP committee kind of looked at it.
I agree 100%. And if SMU and Miami play in the ACC championship game, if SMU wins, maybe Miami still gets in. But if Miami wins, it's definitely going to be a one bid league. And then I think based on last night, if the Big Ten does what it's supposed to, like if Indiana takes care of business against Michigan, whatever happens against Ohio State, and then they have Purdue, Penn State takes care of business, Oregon, Ohio State, I think they're going to get 4 no matter what. And then that would leave the SEC with 3 and everyone else getting 1 if I'm reading the polls how I think they was last night.
Well, that's what's crazy about this game this weekend with LSU Bama. Like Bama being at 11, if they do lose, and LSU, who knows how they are judged after that type of game. But like then we're talking about SMU being on the fringe, and if they go all the way to the ACC championship, it becomes like a Georgia Bama last year, where if SMU their loss is to the ACC champion Miami, and they're ranked before that game at like 11, do they drop out and then does like an LSU with a bunch of losses or a few losses, not a bunch? Do they jump an SMU team who only loses to the Hurricanes, who are considered, they're getting a first round bye then?
And I think SMU's win over Pitt is a big one.
Huge.
So I think that is considered a massive one in their eyes. And there's so much that could still happen, obviously. Teams have been great and then shit the next week on a regular basis through this season. At this point, hopefully everybody kind of understands their identity and they're able to continue to win, the teams that we project them to win. I went 3-8 on picks last week. Okay, that's because we are still at the point where teams are kind of who's going to be the ones that kind of step up and separate themselves from everybody else and secure a spot in a 12-team playoff. That's what these next few weeks are all about. And that's why I think last night's rollout of these things was awesome. Now, kind of got lost in the mix.
A little bit.
Lost in the mix. Those election shows were so boring.
They need McElroy and Reese and them doing that.
Boog and Joey Galloway.
Yeah,
I agree. Did everybody else? I don't watch this shit enough. That last night's like my first time.
The only night
that I really get to see it. And
only Kornacki's worth his shit. That's it.
I didn't even. Where was he? I didn't even get a lot of Kornacki.
He wasn't on enough. I could tell you that.
He wasn't the main NBC. I thought he was NBC's guy.
Yeah,
so did I.
I didn't see him working anything.
No, he was only MS.
I did see a lot of the map people searching. They're looking. They were going everywhere for a lot of the evening. Everybody was kind of looking at the same map. That was a wild night to experience that with those political people.
Crazy.
As somebody that doesn't pay attention enough to it all, to kind of sit through their emotion, and then afterwards, what a night. Once again, boring as shit. You got people for 5-6 hours. Let's go ahead and respect that. Nonetheless, college football playoff. If Iowa would have won, I think with the presence that the Big Ten has in this thing, you're in a good spot going forward.
For sure. And I think to your point, like a couple of these teams in the SEC or the Big Ten who potentially aren't going to be in their conference championship games, it is like a rising tides raises all boats. I think you're in a better position if you're like a 2-loss Alabama team and you win out and you're still kind of on like the fringe there. Like if you don't play that final week, if you don't lose the SEC championship and a team like SMU or one of those other teams that
lose,
then you're going to get in. Like I don't think there's any way, because they're going to favor the SEC and the Big Ten.
It's going to be drama. It's going to be drama for sure. I believe the Big Ten and the SEC had meetings too already. They kind of understand what the future is looking like. I think everybody in college ball is looking at it.
Right.
The only question for the Big Ten is Penn State ever going to win one? I mean, what a win. I talked about this on game day. Oregon beats Ohio State in this college football season after a massive win for a big team. You go down the list, Texas, Alabama, everybody that's basically been ranked at the top. The next week, relief syndrome, I believe is what Coach Saban calls it. They beat Ohio State, then they have to fly all the way to Indiana. They stay in Indianapolis, drive an hour and a half up to Purdue, win 35-zip. Okay, so it's like if there was ever a letdown game, that could happen. Long 5-hour flight, then an hour and a half drive up to a place against a team that nobody really thinks is good.
Think this year,
Nobody thinks is good. And then they beat them 35-0, hop on a plane, fly out. Then they get named number 1 school in the country. Here you go, you're number 1. We FaceTime Coach Lanning. We go, congrats, dude, you did it. You did it, bro. Wow. You can hang him up for the year. You're number 1 team. Shakes his head, hangs up on us immediately upon saying that. Then they go and play Illinois, beat the hell out of them. It's like that team mentally is a number 1 team, physically number 1 team. So Ohio State, having that be their only loss, and it came down to the very last second, I think it's great for their resume. Getting a win against Penn State whenever they're not playing their best is great for their resume. And maybe this is the year that Ohio State goes on a run. But they're not the only ones.